Then, out of absolutely nowhere, she turned to me and said, "So, I was thinking you should give me full access to your savings." I actually laughed because I genuinely thought she was joking. It seemed so random, so out of left field, that it couldn't possibly be serious. But she didn't laugh back. Instead, she tilted her head in that particular way she does when she thinks she's about to educate someone, and said very deliberately, "I'm serious. Couples who don't share everything are toxic." The word toxic hung in the air between us. I asked her why she needed access, not in an accusatory way, just confused about where this was suddenly coming from. That's when her entire tone shifted. It went cold, annoyed, like I just failed some test I didn't even know I was taking. She said flatly, "Because if you don't, that's financial abuse." I'm Aaron, 31 years old, working in software development. And until recently, I thought I had a pretty solid relationship with my girlfriend, Lena, who's 29. We'd been together for just under 2 years, living together for the last 8 months of that time. On paper, we probably looked like a perfectly functional couple. No cheating scandals, no screaming matches in public, no dramatic breakups at bars or restaurants, just two adults with decent jobs and a shared lease, navigating what I believed was a normal relationship. At least, that's what I told myself for longer than I should have. Lena has always had what I initially called a strong personality. She's sharp, incredibly opinionated, and in her own mind, she's never wrong about anything. When we first started dating, I actually admired that quality. I told myself it was confidence, that she knew what she wanted and wasn't afraid to express it. But over time, that confidence started to look different. She'd correct waiters about menu items she'd never tried, talk over people in group settings as if their contributions weren't worth hearing. And she had this particular habit of explaining my own job to me in front of other people, as if I hadn't been doing it for nearly a decade. I learned pretty early in our relationship that disagreeing with Lena wasn't worth the headache it would create. The arguments would spiral, she'd bring up past incidents as evidence of my character flaws, and somehow I'd end up apologizing for things I didn't even think I'd done wrong. So I started picking my battles carefully, letting the small things slide, convincing myself that this was just compromise, that this was what adults did in relationships. That part, I'll admit, is on me. I chose silence over conflict more times than I should have. Money was one area where I thought we were actually aligned, at least at first. I work in software and make decent money, not wealthy by any means, but comfortable. I've always been careful with my finances, not cheap or stingy, just intentional about how I spend and save. I've maintained separate savings accounts since long before I met Lena, an emergency fund, long-term savings, and some modest investments. She knew about this from early on in our relationship. We'd structured our shared expenses in a way that felt fair. We split rent and utilities proportionally based on our incomes. I covered most of the groceries since I earned more, and she handled smaller household items and her own personal expenses. It seemed equitable to both of us, or so I thought. Lena, on the other hand, had always strongly hated keeping finances separate. She called it half-committed energy, as if my financial independence meant I was somehow less invested in our future together. Anytime money came up, she'd make pointed comments. "It's weird you don't trust me with money," she'd say. Or, "If we're building a future, why are you acting single?" I brushed these off as talk, annoying but harmless. I told myself she was venting, that she didn't mean it. I had no idea these comments were laying groundwork for something bigger. Looking back with the clarity that distance provides, I can see warning signs I ignored. How she escalated requests, how she tested boundaries with small demands before larger ones, how she weaponized words like trust and commitment. But at the time, in our shared apartment, I believed we were a normal couple with normal disagreements about money. I had no idea one conversation would change everything.
Last week, everything changed in a single conversation that I'll probably never forget. We were sitting on the couch after dinner, both of us in that relaxed post-meal state. Lena was scrolling on her phone, I was half watching something forgettable on Netflix, and the apartment was quiet in that comfortable way that couples get used to. Then, out of absolutely nowhere, she turned to me and said, "So, I was thinking, you should give me full access to your savings." I actually laughed because I genuinely thought she was joking. It seemed so random, so out of left field that it couldn't possibly be serious. But she didn't laugh back. Instead, she tilted her head in that particular way she does when she thinks she's about to educate someone and said very deliberately, "I'm serious. Couples who don't share everything are toxic." The word toxic hung in the air between us. I asked her why she needed access, not in an accusatory way, just confused about where this was suddenly coming from. That's when her entire tone shifted. It went cold, annoyed, like I just failed some test I didn't even know I was taking. She said flatly, "Because if you don't, that's financial abuse." And something in my chest went very still. I didn't respond right away, not because I was stunned exactly, but because I was trying to understand how we'd arrived at this moment so casually, like she'd just accused me of forgetting to buy milk instead of being an abuser. I asked her to repeat what she'd just said, keeping my voice as calm as I could manage. She sighed loudly and exaggerated, like I was being deliberately dense or difficult. "Aaron, controlling money is literally one of the main forms of abuse. I've read about this. You keeping your savings locked away where I can't see or touch it is a power imbalance." That word, power, kept coming up with her lately, I realized. Everything was about power dynamics and imbalances. I told her as clearly as I could that I wasn't controlling anything. The money was mine, earned by me, saved by me. I paid my share of our expenses without question. I never questioned her spending habits or told her what she could or couldn't buy with her own money. I just didn't hand over my bank login credentials. That seemed reasonable to me. She actually smirked at that point. Actually smirked. "That's exactly what an abuser would say," she replied with this unsettling confidence. "You don't even think you're doing anything wrong." Something about the way she delivered that line felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced this entire argument in the shower, or maybe workshopped it with her friends beforehand. I asked her directly if someone had put this idea in her head. Wrong move. That question set her off immediately. She snapped upright on the couch and said sharply, "Wow, so now I can't even have my own thoughts? You really do see me as beneath you, don't you?" I remember noticing with strange clarity how fast the conversation had escalated. Just 10 minutes earlier, we'd been casually debating what to watch on television. Now I was apparently an abusive partner who saw her as somehow inferior. She went on a passionate rant about trust, about how real couples don't hide things, about how if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, she wouldn't even know what accounts existed or where. I told her we could discuss proper planning, beneficiaries, wills, normal adult stuff that responsible people handle. "That's not the same," she said sharply, cutting me off before I could finish my thought. "That still puts you in control. That still means I have to wait for permission, wait for you to die, wait for something catastrophic to happen before I have any say." Her voice was rising now, not quite yelling, but getting there, each word coming faster than the last. I asked her directly, trying to cut through the emotional escalation. "What are you actually asking for here?" She crossed her arms tightly across her chest and looked at me with this expression that was half defiance, half expectation. "Your login," she said simply. "All of it. Savings, investments, everything. Full transparency." I said no. Not angrily, not dramatically, not defensively. Just a calm, clear no. Her face changed instantly. There was no yelling yet, just this tight, deeply offended smile that didn't reach her eyes at all. "Okay," she said slowly, drawing out the word like she was about to make a point I'd regret missing. "Then let me be absolutely clear. What you're doing right now is financial abuse, and I won't stay in a relationship where I'm being controlled like this." That was the moment. The exact moment. Not because she wanted access to my money, that was just a symptom. The real issue was that she was willing to label me an abuser to get what she wanted. She was weaponizing the language of harm to manipulate me into compliance. I nodded slowly, processing what had just happened. "You're right," I said quietly. She blinked rapidly, clearly not expecting that response. "Excuse me?" she said, her tone uncertain for the first time in this conversation. "You're right," I repeated calmly, my voice steady even though my heart was pounding. "This isn't healthy." She relaxed visibly, her shoulders dropping, a small smile starting to form. She thought she'd won. She thought I was about to cave and give her what she wanted.
Then I added, "So we're done." The silence that followed felt heavy and thick, like all the air had suddenly been sucked out of the room. For several long seconds, she just stared at me like I'd spoken in a language she couldn't understand, like the words hadn't quite computed yet. "Where what?" she finally asked, her voice small and confused. "Done," I said again, just as calm as before. My heart was beating hard enough that I could feel it in my throat, but somehow my voice didn't shake. That surprised me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I just felt clear, more clear than I'd felt in months. She laughed then, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. "You're being dramatic. Sit down." But I stayed exactly where I was, standing by the couch. "No," I said firmly, "I'm not giving you access to my money, and I'm not staying with someone who calls me abusive when they don't get what they want." Her face hardened instantly, all traces of confusion vanishing. "So you're punishing me for setting boundaries?" she shot back. That word again, boundaries. Everything was a buzzword with her lately. Boundaries, power dynamics, emotional labor, gaslighting. She'd learned the vocabulary of psychology and was using it like weapons. "I'm responding to yours," I replied evenly. "You said you won't stay. I'm agreeing. I'm making it easy for both of us." She stood up and started pacing, running both hands through her hair like this was my breakdown. "Unbelievable," she muttered. "You hear yourself? You're throwing away a 2-year relationship over money."
"No," I said, quietly but firmly. "I'm ending it over manipulation." That's when the real insult started. Lena didn't yell. She never really yelled. What she did was somehow worse. She talked slowly, deliberately, like she was carefully explaining something complicated to a small child who couldn't quite grasp basic concepts. "You're selfish," she said, enunciating each syllable. "You've always been selfish. You hide behind logic and rational thinking because you don't actually know how to be generous or vulnerable with another person. Any woman with self-respect would see this behavior as a massive red flag." I just nodded. "Okay," I said simply. That seemed to irritate her even more than arguing back would have. My calm acceptance of her insults appeared to throw her off balance. "So that's it?" she asked, her voice rising with incredulity. "You just walk away? Just like that?" "Yes," I replied. She scoffed, shaking her head with exaggerated disbelief. "You think you're some kind of hero right now, don't you? You think you're taking some noble stand?" "I don't," I said honestly. "I'm tired. I'm tired of feeling like I need to defend basic boundaries. I'm tired of having my character put on trial every time I say no to something." She crossed her arms again and leaned back against the kitchen counter, studying me with narrowed eyes. "You'll regret this," she said with absolute certainty. "You'll realize how hard it is to find someone who actually challenges you, who pushes you to be better instead of just accepting all your flaws." I picked up my keys from the table, feeling strangely calm despite the tension crackling in the air. "I don't need to be challenged by someone who's trying to control me," I said. "There's a difference between growth and submission." For the first time since this conversation started, I saw real uncertainty flicker across her face. Her confident facade cracked just slightly. "Where are you going?" she asked, and I noticed her voice had lost some of its edge. "For a walk," I said, heading toward the door. "When I come back, we can talk about logistics, the lease, how we divide things, all the practical stuff. But the relationship part is over. That's not up for negotiation." She opened her mouth like she was about to launch into another cutting response, then stopped herself. I watched her switch tactics in real time. Her expression softened, her voice dropped to something quieter, almost vulnerable. "You know," she said carefully, "most men would be grateful to have a girlfriend who wants to build something real, who's willing to be this invested in the relationship." I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt absolutely nothing. No pull, no guilt, no second thoughts, just clarity. "I want peace," I said simply. "Not access requests, not ultimatums, not accusations of abuse when I maintain boundaries. Just peace." I walked out before she could respond, closing the door quietly behind me.
And for the first time in what felt like 2 years, the silence that surrounded me felt like genuine relief instead of temporary ceasefire. I walked for almost an hour that night alone. No music, no phone scrolling, just me, the cold air, and that strange calm that comes after you stop arguing with reality and accept it. The streets were quiet, and I let my mind wander freely without pressure. When I got back to the apartment, all the lights were blazing bright, every single one. That should have been my first clear warning sign.
Lena was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open in front of her, and beside it was my notebook, the one I used to track bills, savings goals, and general financial planning. She didn't even look up when I came through the door. "I made a list," she said flatly, tapping the table with her finger. "Since you want to be impulsive about this, I figured I'd be the practical one and start organizing how this is actually going to work." I didn't sit down. I just stood there in the doorway, keys still in my hand, watching her. She finally glanced up, her expression annoyed. "We need to talk about how this is going to work going forward. You can't just kick me out. I'm on the lease too." "I know," I said calmly. "I'm not trying to kick you out. We're both on the lease, so we'll handle it like adults. We'll figure out who stays, who goes, or if we both leave, but we'll do it properly." She rolled her eyes dramatically. "There you go again. Detached. Cold, clinical. This is exactly what I'm talking about, Aaron. You treat everything like a transaction." I noticed she'd poured herself wine. It wasn't even 9 yet. "I told my sister what you said," she continued, swirling the glass deliberately. "She agrees this is financial abuse. Honestly, I'm being generous staying calm right now. Most women would have called you out publicly." That word again, abuse, thrown around like a tool to manipulate. I asked why my notebook was open on the table. "Oh," she said casually, "I was trying to understand what you're hiding, what's so important you'd throw everything away." That did it. "Close the laptop," I said firmly. "Now." She laughed. "You're acting guilty. If there was nothing to hide, why care?" "No," I said, voice harder. "You're crossing a line. Close it." She slammed the laptop shut with more force than necessary and stood up abruptly. "So what? Now you're going to lock everything down even more? You're literally proving my point right now." I took a slow, deliberate breath before responding. "Lena, listen very carefully. We are broken up. As of right now, we are no longer in a relationship. I don't owe you explanations, I don't owe you access, and I don't owe you justification for my choices anymore." Her face flushed dark red. "After everything I've invested in you?" she said, her voice rising. That stopped me cold. "What exactly did you invest?" I asked quietly. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Opened it again. "Time," she said finally. "Emotional labor. Support. I've been there for you." I nodded slowly. "So have I. I've invested the exact same things. That doesn't mean either of us owns the other." She stepped closer, her voice sharp with anger. "You think you're so superior because you make more money than me. You've always thought that." "I never said that," I replied evenly. "You don't have to say it," she snapped back. "It's written all over everything you do. Every decision you make screams that you think you're better than me." That's when I realized something uncomfortable but clarifying. This had never actually been about shared finances or partnership. It was about control. It was about leveling a playing field in a way that only benefited her. I grabbed my overnight bag from the closet and started packing essentials: toothbrush, change of clothes, phone charger. Her voice sharpened further. "If you walk out that door again, don't bother coming back." I zipped up my overnight bag, picked it up, and looked directly at her. "I already did walk out," I said quietly. And for the first time since this whole thing started, she actually looked scared. I stayed at a friend's place that night. Spare room, clean sheets, no questions asked. He just handed me a beer and said, "Couch or bed, your choice." That was enough. That was exactly what I needed in that moment. The next morning, my phone was absolutely full. Missed calls, long texts, voice notes I didn't open. By the time I forced myself to check, the tone had already shifted dramatically from the night before.
First messages were angry, accusations about abandonment, about running away when things got real, about proving every negative thing she'd thought. Then came what I mentally labeled rewrites. I didn't mean abuse like that, and you're twisting my words, and we were just having a conversation. By noon, she'd moved into bargaining mode. We don't have to share everything right away, maybe just visibility, not access. We can talk to a therapist. Please come home so we can discuss this like adults. I didn't respond to any of it, not one message. That afternoon, I went back to the apartment with my friend. Not for emotional support, though that was appreciated, but as a witness. I didn't trust Lena not to twist things later, not to claim I'd said or done something I hadn't actually done. I needed someone there who could verify exactly what happened. Lena was waiting when we arrived. She'd cleaned the entire apartment, like deep cleaned every surface. Candles were lit on the coffee table, soft music was playing low in the background, and she was dressed like we were going out on a special date night. The contrast between the romantic setting and the actual situation was absolutely jarring. "You brought backup," she said, her eyes flicking to my friend standing in the doorway. There was an edge to her voice. "Just here to grab my stuff," I replied evenly. Her jaw tightened visibly. "You're really doing this? Actually going through with it?" I nodded. Yes. She followed me from room to room as I collected my belongings, providing constant running commentary the entire time. "You're acting like I stole from you or something. I was just trying to build a real future together. You're proving that you don't actually value partnership or genuine commitment at all." When I picked up my folder of important documents, birth certificate, passport, tax records, and papers, she snapped suddenly. "So that's it," she said, her voice rising. "You get to walk away with everything while I'm left with nothing?" I stopped and turned to look at her directly. "Everything I brought in, yes, that's how it works." She laughed, but it was bitter and harsh. "God, you're such a stereotype, such a perfect example of everything wrong with men like you." I didn't ask which stereotype she meant. I didn't ask what she meant by men like you. I just continued packing. As we headed toward the door with the last of my things, she delivered what she probably thought would be the line that landed hardest, that would make me reconsider everything. "You know you'll never find someone who cares enough to actually fight for this," she said. I paused at the door, turned back to face her one last time, and said quietly, "I don't want someone who fights me. I want someone who respects me." She didn't follow us out. That night, sitting alone in my new temporary space, I finally felt the weight of what had just happened begin to settle. I changed every single password I had. Bank accounts, email, cloud storage, social media, everything. Not because I was genuinely scared she'd try to access them, but because I was completely done pretending that trust meant unlimited exposure to every aspect of my life. I needed clear boundaries, and this was where they started. 2 days after I moved out, I signed a lease on a new apartment. It was smaller than what Lena and I had shared, but it was mine. Every decision about it was mine alone. The paint color, the furniture arrangement, the temperature setting, all of it. And for the first time since we'd started dating, my money and my life felt like they genuinely belonged to me again. I thought that clean break would be the end of everything. Move on, learn the hard lessons, don't look back, process the experience, and grow from it. I severely underestimated how difficult Lena would make losing control over me. About a week after I'd moved into my new place, she sent me an email. Not a text message this time, but an actual email with a subject line that simply read, "Documentation." That should have been my warning. Inside was a long, meticulously structured message that read less like communication from an ex-girlfriend and more like an official case file being prepared for submission. Bullet points, section headers, timestamps, the whole professional treatment. She claimed that I had financially destabilized her by leaving so suddenly, that my refusal to share savings had created what she called dependency dynamics in our relationship, that my abrupt exit had caused her both emotional and economic harm that would take months to recover from. She'd attached screenshots as evidence, rent statements, old Venmo payments for shared expenses, even a photograph of groceries I'd bought several months ago, circled in red marker like evidence at a crime scene. At the very bottom of this extensive document, she wrote in a tone that managed to sound both threatening and reasonable simultaneously. "I'm not trying to escalate this situation, but I need you to acknowledge the harm you've caused me." I stared at my computer screen for a long time after reading that. Not because I felt guilty about anything I'd done, but because I could finally see the entire pattern with complete clarity. Everything with Lena had always been fundamentally about narrative control. Whoever controlled the story controlled the situation, controlled the power dynamics, controlled the outcome. When she couldn't get access to my money, she reframed her request as me committing abuse. When I ended the relationship, it became me causing harm. If I stayed silent and didn't respond, she could decide what my silence meant and shape that interpretation however she wanted. So I replied exactly once. Short, direct, impossible to misinterpret. "Do not contact me again, except regarding lease logistics and final shared expenses. Any further accusations or claims should go through a lawyer if you feel that's necessary." She responded within literally 5 minutes. Just 3 words, but they told me everything I needed to know about where her head was. Wow, threatening me now? I didn't answer that message. I didn't answer anything after that point. 2 days later, she posted something vague on social media. No names, but clear enough anyone who knew us would understand. A long caption about men who weaponize finances and how emotional abuse doesn't always look loud. The comments on her social media post flooded in almost immediately. Heart emojis everywhere. "So proud of you for speaking your truth. You're so strong for sharing this. You deserve so much better." The public support was overwhelming and unanimous. A mutual friend texted me later that same day asking carefully if I was okay. That particular message hurt more than Lena's actual post. Not because I cared what strangers on the internet thought about a situation they knew nothing about, but because Lena knew exactly how to frame herself as the victim without ever mentioning the critical part, the part where she demanded my bank passwords and then called me abusive when I refused. That night, I sat alone in my new apartment feeling the anger finally hit me. Not explosive rage, just this heavy, frustrating weight pressing down on my chest. I realized something important in that moment. I hadn't just dodged a difficult breakup, I dodged an entire future where every single boundary I tried to maintain would have been systematically turned into an accusation against my character. If I'd given in on the money, it wouldn't have stopped there. Next would have been how I spent my time, then who I talked to, then how I made decisions about my own life. All of it would have been repackaged under the banner of partnership and building something real together. I didn't dodge a bullet, I dodged a slow, methodical erosion of everything that made me myself. The fallout from her post lingered longer than I'd expected. Not in my actual life, but in the social circles around it. Mutual friends started choosing sides without ever bothering to ask what had actually happened. Some drifted away quietly, unfollowing me on social media, stopping their occasional check-in texts. Others asked careful, loaded questions designed to extract information. "So what really happened with the money thing?" they'd ask, as if there was some version of events where I'd look reasonable and another version where I'd look like the villain she was painting me as. I kept my answers frustratingly short and simple. We wanted different things, was usually enough. Anything longer felt like inviting debate, like opening the door to people who wanted to pick apart my decisions and weigh them against her public narrative. Lena, meanwhile, kept posting adjacent content, not directly about me anymore, but close enough. Articles about emotional labor in relationships, infographics about invisible forms of abuse, quotes about men who fear real commitment but disguise it as self-respect and independence. She never used my name, never pointed directly at me, but she didn't have to. Anyone who knew us could read between the lines easily enough. What surprised me most during all of this was how little it actually bothered me. A month earlier, I would have obsessed over every comment, every implication, every shared article. I would have drafted responses I'd never send, imagined conversations where I explained my side perfectly. Now it all felt distant, like I was reading about a character in a book I'd already finished and moved on from. The story she needed to tell about me, whatever version made her feel justified or vindicated or right, that was her story to tell now. I didn't need to correct it or defend myself publicly or match her energy. I didn't need to engage in some exhausting social media battle for validation. The people who mattered either asked me directly or trusted me without asking. Everyone else was background noise I could choose to ignore.
About 2 weeks after the breakup, Lena tried one final angle that I honestly should have seen coming. She showed up at my workplace. Not inside the building, security wouldn't have allowed that, but in the lobby, leaning casually against the wall like she just happened to be in the area. I only found out because the receptionist messaged me asking if I knew a woman named Lena who claimed it was urgent and needed to speak with me. My first instinct was to say no, to pretend I didn't know who she was talking about and let security handle it. But then I sighed, rubbed my face, and admitted yes, I knew her. Against every bit of my better judgment, I decided to go down and deal with this directly. When I stepped into the lobby, she looked different, softer somehow. No sharp edges or defensive posture, hair pulled back, neutral clothes, tired eyes instead of angry ones. If I didn't know her well, I might have believed the vulnerability was genuine. "Hi, Erin," she said quietly. I didn't move closer or smile or offer warmth. "What do you want, Lena?" She flinched at my tone. "I think things got out of hand. I've been thinking and I wanted to talk." I waited silently, not making this easy for her. She started talking at length about stress and fear, about how she'd been reading too much online and got caught up in ideas that weren't really hers originally. She admitted the word abuse was too strong, said it wasn't what she actually meant. She talked about feeling abandoned when the relationship ended, about panicking when she realized how much power I had financially and how little she had in comparison. That last part was probably the closest thing to genuine honesty I'd heard from her in months. "I didn't want your money," she said, her voice dropping even lower. "I wanted to know you couldn't just leave me stranded without any support or safety net." I looked at her very carefully for a long, quiet moment, before finally answering with complete honesty. "That's exactly why I left, Lena." Her eyes filled with tears. "So that's it? You won't even consider talking about fixing this? About trying again?" I shook my head slowly but firmly. "Lena, you didn't make a simple mistake. You tried to trap me using psychological language. You tried to shame me into giving you compliance and control. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a fundamental deal breaker." She whispered, barely audible, "I would have done anything for you." I replied calmly but definitively, "You would have done anything to me. There's a massive difference." That statement landed hard. I could see it in her face. She didn't argue after that, didn't try another angle or manipulation tactic. She just nodded slowly, wiped at her face with the back of her hand, and said quietly, "I guess I completely misjudged who you were." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe you just didn't like finding out I had boundaries you couldn't cross." I watched her walk out of the building, her shoulders slightly hunched, and I felt something close to sympathy. Not regret, not second thoughts, not guilt, just sympathy for someone who'd built an entire strategy around control and discovered too late that it doesn't actually create the connection she claimed to want. Back upstairs at my desk, I sat down and realized something important. My hands weren't shaking. My chest wasn't tight. There was no overwhelming urge to chase after her for closure or explanation. I didn't feel like I'd won some great victory. I just felt like I'd successfully stepped out of a dangerous storm before it could turn into a full hurricane. The lease situation resolved itself more cleanly than I'd expected. No dramatic legal battles, no surprise emails demanding money, just distance and paperwork. Lena found a roommate to take over my portion of the rent. I signed the necessary documents, and that chapter closed without further incident. In that growing distance between us, I started noticing things I hadn't fully appreciated before. How much lighter my life felt without constant tension. How I could spend money on something I wanted without mentally preparing for judgment or commentary. How I could make plans without needing to justify them or defend them as reasonable.
There was no subtle monitoring of my time, no passive-aggressive comments disguised as concern, no need to treat every personal boundary like it was a character flaw requiring explanation. One evening, about a month after everything ended, I ran into Maya at a grocery store, one of Lena's close friends, someone I'd always gotten along with reasonably well. She looked uncomfortable the moment she saw me, like she'd been mentally rehearsing something and hadn't expected to need it so soon. "Hey, can I ask you something?" she said after we'd exchanged awkward hellos. I nodded, curious where this was heading. "Did you really refuse to share money with Lena because you fundamentally didn't trust her?" she asked directly. I appreciated the directness, actually. I met her eyes and said simply, "I refused because trust doesn't require surrender of everything I am. Trust and control aren't the same thing." She was quiet for a moment, clearly processing that answer. Then she said something that stuck with me for days afterward. "That's not how she told it. That's not how she's been telling it at all." I wasn't surprised. "I know," I replied calmly. Maya hesitated, looking like she was debating whether to say more. Then she added quietly, "For what it's worth, this isn't the first time she's done something like this, reframing situations when they don't go her way." That information settled somewhere in my chest, not as vindication exactly, but as confirmation that my instincts hadn't been wrong. After that conversation, things continued to settle into a new normal. The mutual friend situations mostly resolved themselves through natural drift rather than dramatic confrontations. Some people chose sides, others just quietly faded from both our lives. And a few actually reached out to me privately to say they'd always found Lena exhausting, but hadn't felt comfortable saying so while we were together. The lease issue wrapped up without incident. No legal complications, no surprise bills, no last-minute manipulation attempts, just clean paperwork and closed accounts. And in that clean closure, I noticed something important. I wasn't bracing for impact anymore. No mental preparation before checking my phone, no spike of adrenaline when a notification appeared, no background hum of tension running underneath normal moments of my day. I was just existing, living, being calm in a way I hadn't fully realized I'd lost. That's when the real understanding hit me about how much energy that relationship had been quietly draining. With Lena, everything had been negotiation disguised as intimacy. Every boundary needed evaluation and reframing. If I said no, it became why my no was harmful. If I stood firm, character flaws. Nothing was simply mine. I noticed the contrast. Friends asked favors without expectations. Coworkers respected "can't right now." Disagreements felt clean. One night, several months after everything had ended, I ran into Lena again completely by chance. Same coffee shop we used to frequent together, total coincidence, neither of us planning it. She saw me first. There was a brief flicker of something across her face, surprise, maybe irritation, possibly discomfort, but she recovered quickly. She'd always been good at that, at controlling her immediate reactions. "Hey," she said, her voice carefully measured and neutral. "Hey," I replied, matching her tone exactly. She asked how I'd been doing, a polite social question that felt obligatory rather than genuinely curious. I said I was good, keeping it simple and honest. She nodded like she'd expected exactly that answer, and somehow didn't particularly like hearing it confirmed. "You seem different," she observed, studying me with narrowed eyes. "I am different," I acknowledged without hesitation. She tilted her head in that familiar way, the gesture I used to find endearing but now just recognized as calculated. "Still guarding your precious independence like it's made of gold, I see." I smiled, just slightly, genuinely amused rather than defensive. "No," I said calmly, "I'm just not giving it away anymore. There's a fundamental difference." She didn't have an immediate response to that statement. The confident comeback she usually had ready seemed to fail her in that moment. As she turned to walk away, I realized something else with perfect clarity. If I had stayed in that relationship, if I had handed over access to my accounts just to maintain temporary peace, I wouldn't have actual peace right now. I would have constant surveillance, carefully disguised as trust. I would have compliance mistaken for love. I would have surrender masquerading as partnership. I finished my coffee, sitting there alone, completely unbothered by the encounter, And that's when I knew with absolute certainty that whatever story Lena still needed to tell herself about me and our relationship, I genuinely didn't need to correct it anymore. I was done defending decisions that didn't require defense. A few weeks after that unexpected encounter, a mutual friend sent me a screenshot without any explanation. I didn't ask for it, didn't request it, but I was oddly glad to see it anyway. It was a post Lena had written late one night, longer than her usual vague captions about emotional abuse and financial control. She talked extensively about losing someone because they apparently couldn't handle accountability, about how certain men fundamentally fear transparency when they actively benefit from existing imbalances in relationships. The comment section was noticeably different this time compared to her earlier posts. Less blind support, fewer heart emojis, more quiet questions from people who seemed skeptical. Someone had even commented directly, "But didn't you demand access to his personal accounts?" I didn't feel vindicated by seeing that question. I didn't feel like justice had somehow been served. I just felt genuinely finished with the entire narrative. That's the crucial part people don't talk about enough in these situations. Not every ending actually needs justice or vindication or public correction of the record. Some endings just need distance, time, and the clarity that comes from no longer being emotionally invested in someone else's version of events. Looking back with months of perspective, the moment she said financial abuse, something snapped into place. Not because the accusation scared me, but because it showed how easily she'd weaponized psychological language for compliance. If I'd given in, it wouldn't have stopped. Next would be my time, my conversations, my decisions, all repackaged as partnership and building something. I didn't dodge a simple bullet. I dodged a slow, methodical, systematic erosion of everything that fundamentally made me who I am as a person. I'm not angry at Lena anymore. I don't harbor resentment or hatred. I don't spend time thinking about revenge or vindication. I just see her clearly now, without the distorting filter of hope or attachment. And that clarity, that simple ability to see the situation for exactly what it was, has a powerful way of killing emotional attachment without requiring any drama whatsoever. My life these days is remarkably quiet, stable, peaceful in ways I'd forgotten were even possible. My money sits exactly where I put it, earning interest, being invested wisely, existing without controversy. My choices don't require defending to anyone. When I say no to something, it remains no. It doesn't transform into an extended negotiation or become evidence of moral failing. And when I say yes to something, it actually means something real, because it comes from genuine desire rather than exhausted compliance. So, here's exactly why I'm sharing this entire story publicly. If someone in your life tells you that maintaining your personal boundaries constitutes abuse, pause immediately. If someone insists that trust inherently means unlimited access to every aspect of your existence, pause and think carefully. If someone consistently reframes your autonomy as cruelty or selfishness, stop and evaluate what's actually happening. Love doesn't require complete surrender of yourself. Trust doesn't require total exposure of everything you are. And real partnership doesn't start with ultimatums designed to break down your resistance. She said directly to my face, "You're not giving me full access to your savings. That's financial abuse." I replied simply, "You're right about one thing. This isn't healthy." And then I walked away from the situation. Not because I was wrong about anything, not because I failed at the relationship, but because I finally understood with perfect clarity that I was completely done accepting manipulation disguised as partnership. The moment Lena weaponized the term abuse to describe my boundary, the relationship was effectively already over. I just happened to be the person who acknowledged that reality first and acted on it decisively. That evening, months after everything ended, sitting in my apartment that was truly mine, I checked my savings account. Not to guard it anxiously, not to stress over every transaction, but simply because I could and wanted to. It wasn't the actual number in the account that made me smile with genuine contentment. It was the profound realization that absolutely no one felt entitled to it anymore. No one was viewing it as something they deserved access to. No one was treating my financial independence as a problem requiring correction. And that understanding, that simple freedom, was worth every uncomfortable conversation, every difficult decision, every moment of standing firm when it would have been easier to just give in. About 3 months into my new independent life, something unexpected happened that gave me real pause. I was browsing a local bookstore, casually wandering through sections, when I overheard two women having a conversation nearby. One was describing her boyfriend's supposedly controlling behavior, specifically that he wouldn't share his passwords or give her access to his bank accounts. I paused for a moment, listened briefly to her perspective, then kept walking. Their story wasn't mine to fix or interfere with, and I'd learned something incredibly valuable. Sometimes protecting your own hard-won peace matters more than trying to save everyone else from their choices. I'm at peace now. Real, genuine, sustainable peace.